Hi friends, I've got a little story I'd like to share with you today. I've entitled it Back in the Day. In the mid-1990s, I served as pastor at Greenville Baptist Church, which was located in Greenville, Florida. Big surprise there. That was just a stone's throw away from the southern border with Georgia. In 1849, Greenville folks hauled pine timbers from Waycross in mule-drawn wagons to build and consecrate a church building. And there in the late 1990s, we were on the verge of celebrating 150 years of faithful service to our Lord and the community. This community has a heritage of close-knit relationships and care. Some of it was celebrated in community events like the Christmas concert, which was held annually on the hallowed steps to the entryway of the sanctuary of our church. Now, you could have fit the entire Mormon Tabernacle Choir on those steps because climbing them never ended. It was like ascending the 551 steps to the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. Well, needless to say, hellos and goodbyes were all conducted at the church's back doors. In 1997, as we were planning events for the 150-year celebration of the church's history, that summer, Fred, one of our members, opened an antique store where almost nothing was for sale. Let me explain that. Fred had no need to sell anything. He was retired and he had whatever he needed and too much more. Opening the store was a good excuse to empty out his storage spaces and the barn while he conducted his own revitalization of downtown Greenville. The downtown consisted of Burrell's grocery store, Lucy's kitchen, and the defunct railway station, which had its own backstory back in the post-Civil War era of rifle fire that was exchanged between the citizens of Greenville and trains that would pass through Greenville. But that's another story for another day. This new venture of Fred's was a 2,000 square foot space, and Fred said that it was for gathering, chewing, spitting, and telling lies. In short, it gave the old retired men of Greenville a place to connect and plot all sorts of mayhem that men at that age rarely get to do. Well, to celebrate the opening of Fred's new barn storage and storytelling emporium on Main Street was going to be a July 4th event, and it included an appearance of his longtime friend and current governor of the state of Florida in 1997, the Honorable Lawton Chiles, whose helicopter on that day landed just a short limo cruise from the center of the metropolis of Greenville. Now, for the governor's ribbon cutting, Fred tapped this preacher to give the prayer of commemoration, to say that I was a little nervous about being in such a venerated and august company was a little short of the mark. I was, as Tennessee Ernie Ford used to say, as nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rockers. So, now you have the backstory of how Rusty, the kid who grew up on a dirt road and went to a one-room schoolhouse in Hop Hog, Long Island, New York, got to meet a former United States Senator and the Democratic Party's governor of the state of Florida on the steps of Fred's Chewin' and Spittin' Emporium and Storage Unit on the downtown Main Street of Greenville, Florida. Now, here's the good part. Before the ribbon cutting, I had a chance to talk with Walkin Lawton. And that 3 minutes of conversation outside Fred's building was a high point in changing my opinion that there was actually hope for all politicians. He got the name Walkin Lawton because that was his style of campaigning and meeting people. He walked through the streets of Florida. Well, here in this picture I'm going to show you, you see where the conversation between Walkin Lawton and Rusty the Preacher began. If you notice the handshake in that picture, I recall that the governor would not let go until our conversation was over, and we had to go inside for Fred's tour and the explanation of how to stay out of good old boy's spitting range. The details of the few hopes and plans for the Greenville Baptist Church and the state of the world affairs which the governor and I discussed that day are certainly lost to history. They're also at the mercy of whomever would care to reframe and rewrite whatever historical significance there might have been created that day at Fred's Emporium. But here's the part of the conversation I do recall in embarrassing detail. I started the conversation. I said, "I'm so pleased to meet you, sir. It's so nice to welcome you and have us join together in wishing Fred all the best in this new endeavor of his." And Walkin Lawton, or WL, with a huge smile on his face, said, "Well, thank you, preacher. I wish I had the time. I'd tell you enough about Fred's past to make for some really good sermon illustrations for you. But only if you sign the non-disclosure agreement about my part in our youthful indiscretions." I said, "Oh man, you got my attention now." And I introduced my wife. I said, "This is my bride, Elizabeth. She can give you tips on rearranging everything in your office at Tallahassee." He said, "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Brownworth. Now, preacher, I can see you married way above your pay grade." And I said, "You're right there. Well, I know we have to go inside, but can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Sure, shoot." I said, "Well, I'm a Republican, and I know you're in the other party. Is there any chance you'd care to come over to our side?" At this point, on Fred's front porch, and I believe in the entire Western Hemisphere, time stopped, it stood still, and held its breath. And then Walkin Lawton said to me, "Let's go inside and ask Fred that question." And then we laughed and laughed and laughed some more. Stories from back in the day, fitting for Fred's front porch. Have a great day.